Congressman Adam Schiff is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee and a man very much in the news. Congressman, welcome to South by Southwest Studio. We're live for the first time in 3 years. We actually have people here. We have a crew. It's great to be in person and not do this in Zoom.
It is so nice to see people in three dimensions.
Right.
In fact, the last South by Southwest event was the first event that I had that was canceled because of the pandemic. And of course, it was the first of innumerable events after that, but it's great to be back.
You just finished a panel at South by Southwest entitled Misinformation and the Dangers to Democracy, and thank you for joining us right now. Before we talk about the dangers to our U.S. democracy, I have to go abroad. Ukraine right now, it's under active assault and invasion from Russia. There are more than 2 million refugees. The question I have is, you had the intelligence, we had the intelligence. We knew Putin already invaded Ukraine. He invaded Crimea in 2014. We knew this was the plan all along, so why did the U.S. and our European allies not stop him before?
Because he was determined to invade, and short of going to war with Russia, we were not able to deter him. I think, nevertheless, the administration did everything that it could and everything that it should, short of going to war. And the fronting of that intelligence, as you point out, was really an unprecedented step. The intelligence community doesn't like to disclose what it knows because it tells potentially our adversaries what our sources and methods are. But here it was so important for the administration to lay bare the lack of any justification, rationale, to expose this as just Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine. And I think that disclosing that information had that important impact, defanging these false flag operations. And that the importance of that goes on as the Russians are pushing propaganda now aggressively about false claims about biological and chemical weapons. And the U.S. government is responding by pointing out that this is what the Russians do. They lie about this often as a preface for their own use of those kind of weapons.
So we had the intelligence. We shared it as much as we could to prep for it, short of going to war. The intelligence also shows that Putin, like Assad of Syria, he's all in. He will turn Ukraine to ash before conceding. A concession to him is a deeply personal failure. And so in light of where he's going to go, how deeply committed he is to this barbarity, this atrocity, what can the United States and its allies do short of triggering World War III to stop him?
Well, I think we can continue and increase what we're doing already, which is to tighten the economic noose around Russia, to expose to the Russian people the folly of their dictatorial leader and this bloody attack on their Slavic neighbors. We can continue and increase our military support for Ukraine, make sure that Ukraine can raise the costs on Russia. Already, thousands of Russian troops have been killed and are going home in body bags. The only thing that's going to bring an end to this conflict is if Putin believes that it's now a threat to his regime. That is, public opinion starts to turn on him in Russia. And so I think it's very important what American companies are doing also in pulling out of Russia. Putin is trying to keep a lock on information and mislead his own people, but to the degree Russians see apps they like to use disappearing and restaurants they like to go to disappearing, their ability to participate in national events coming to an end.
World economy.
Their economy in shambles, their ruble's worth nothing. I hope that they will realize that this is the result of this bloody war and call on the regime to put an end to it.
Your panel was about misinformation and the threats to our democracy, and specifically Putin is aggressively using misinformation to try to shore up that base, to try to shore up Russians to make sure that he has their support in this just war that he's claiming that he's fighting. We just found out that pro-Russian outlets are aggressively using Tucker Carlson and Fox News and telling pro-Russian outlets to use him and his rants for Russia's agenda. So we're seeing, in a way, American right-wing news channels doing Putin's work.
This is tragically exactly right. Indeed, it's been going on for some time. The last time I was
this is nothing new.
Well, it's of course worse now that Russia has invaded Ukraine. But years ago, the last time I was on Tucker Carlson, even then I told him that he should move his show to RT because he was doing nothing but carrying the Kremlin's water.
Russia TV.
Russian TV. And now, as you point out, his show is broadcast on Russian TV. They're broadcasting segments of his shows. I think that in the same way American companies are deciding not to do business in Russia, American companies should decide not to sponsor ads on Fox as long as Fox is carrying Putin's propaganda. I'd like to see that same action against any purveyor of those Kremlin falsehoods at home or abroad.
Well, speaking about falsehoods, I think he's subsidized by MyPillow almost exclusively now, and the MyPillow man is a Trumper.
But not just that show, not just Tucker Carlson's show. The whole Fox enterprise ought to be the subject of a boycott by American companies because Fox is profiting from that propaganda. And it's not enough to say, well, we're not advertising on this show. They're advertising on a network that is broadcasting Kremlin lies to the American people.
It's pro-Russian propaganda streamed to the homes of Americans. And this is where it gets dangerous because Tucker, especially when it comes to the right wing, they say he shapes the news for his audience. Tucker has the highest rated TV show. Fox News is the highest rated cable news channel. And so for Americans right now, there's a radicalization element where Americans might be like, well, you know, maybe the Biden administration is just doing too much. Maybe we should pull out. Maybe we shouldn't support. What's the argument in the case that you can give to Americans who are skeptical about going so deep into helping Ukraine right now?
Well, because what the Russians are doing is a threat to, I think, freedom-loving people all around the world, including here at home. What we have seen historically is when you have a dictator invade the neighboring country, it doesn't stop there. And right now, China is watching carefully with an eye to potentially invading Taiwan. If China views the United States as unwilling to live its values, it will invade its neighbors, and other countries may do the same. In that sense, the willingness of the United States to cut off Russian oil and gas, to inflict that economic pain, not just on others, but on ourselves, to show the Chinese and other autocratic regimes that we are willing to sacrifice to live up to our values. I think that's very important.
And how much should Americans sacrifice? Because right now, as we're talking, gas prices are going up. There's also inflation. How much more do you think Americans should take to support Ukraine? And specifically, what you're saying is to support democracy itself, which is under active assault globally.
Well, I'll tell you, of all the horrific images coming back from Ukraine, one really stands out to me, and it was the image of this what looked like an older Ukrainian man throwing his body in front of a Russian tank. And the tank stops and then lurches forward again and stops. And you look at the courage of that man, that Ukrainian man, and all he is willing to put on the line to defend his country and his democracy. And we ought to ask ourselves, what are we willing to do to defend ours? And we are asked to do so much less by comparison. But our democracy is also at risk. It's not at risk from a Russian tank, not directly, but it is at risk from these same forces of propaganda, from the same flirtation with authoritarianism here at home. And we need to be devoted to protecting our democracy and be willing to recognize that historically that's not a free proposition.
Right, it's just something you can't take for granted. You have to fight for it. I'm going to give you a quick question here, but with the threat to our democracy at home, how fragile it is. If it's DEFCON, 0 through 5, 1, 2, 3 is much more severe than 5. Where are we?
I think we're at a 4 or 5. People.
I was going to say 3, but you're much more optimistic than I am.
Oh well, no. I'm sorry. I'm using the 5 as the top.
Oh, the top. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're danger level.
We're at
extreme danger level.
Absolutely extreme danger level, and people need to realize how close we came to losing our democracy. There were multiple efforts to overturn the election. January 6th was the violent culmination, but there were multiple efforts and multiple points of failure. If independent elections officials hadn't resisted the coercion and pressure on them, and a lot of them were Republicans, our system would have failed. If Kevin McCarthy had been the Speaker, our system would have failed, because they would have overturned the election in the House. Right. And if the Justice Department had gone along with a scheme to decapitate their leadership and get behind bogus claims of fraud, our system would have failed. And now there's an attack on the right to vote around the country with these disenfranchisement laws, their efforts to use democracy to attack itself with passage of laws that would allow partisan boards and legislatures to overturn elections if the party that loses wants to change the result. I think we're at a most serious level of danger to our democracy.
That attack is still ongoing. The coup didn't stop. The coup attempt is still happening. We've seen the 6-point memo about John Eastman. We know about the war room at the Willard. We know about Donald Trump still promoting the big lie. We know that Fox News and the right-wing ecosystem is promoting the big lie to the point where a majority of Republican voters believe that Joe Biden did not win the election. He did, with 81 million votes. We know that Donald Trump just yesterday announced that he's running again in 2024. Elections matter. How compromised is Donald Trump by Russia?
Well, sometimes the compromise is out in the open. Donald Trump in 2016 was telling the country he had no business dealings in Russia. In fact, that was a lie. He was pursuing the biggest business deal of his life, a Moscow Trump Tower, which would not only have been the tallest tower in Moscow, but in all of Europe. It would have been a deal that would have earned him hundreds of millions of dollars. And when it was discovered that he was lying about this, he was already president at that point. Yeah. And he was stopped on the White House grounds by reporters saying, "What about that, Mr. President? We now know that you were pursuing this deal while you were lying to the country about it." And his answer was very revealing, which was, "I might have lost the election. Why should I miss out on those opportunities?"
He's got to get paid, art of the deal.
Well, I'm convinced that as president, he also believed he might lose his reelection. Why should he criticize Putin and miss out on that future business opportunity? In Trump's distorted worldview, the country doesn't matter worth a darn. Nothing matters but himself and his money. And he would be a fool to criticize the man that could approve the biggest deal of his life.
And I want to remind people that Donald Trump was also impeached for abusing his power to strong-arm the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, to meddle in the 2020 election and start a sham investigation of Joe Biden and his son Hunter.
That's exactly right.
I think people sometimes forget. They're like, "Oh yeah, that's that."
Well,
he also has his webbed feet in Ukraine,
and he was doing that by withholding hundreds of millions of dollars in military aid that Ukraine needed even then, because Ukraine was even then
Russian forces were amassing.
Well, they were in a shooting war in eastern Ukraine with Russia's little green men. And Trump is out there now after calling Putin a genius and talking about how savvy Putin is.
And Mike Pompeo also called him savvy. I think we should always remember that Mike Pompeo, a week before Ukraine was invaded, he said, "Oh, very savvy."
Yeah, very, very savvy.
They're very pro-Putin, it seems. There's a very pro-Russian, very pro-Putin, it seems. Not so much when it comes to democracy. And I want to mention that is that we talk about Trump oftentimes being compromised. 4 years of presidency, he mocked everybody, not a single word against Putin. I also want to ask, how compromised is the GOP? You work in a bipartisan fashion. We had 8, I believe, Republican senators spend July 4th in Moscow several years ago. And how can you then protect democracy both abroad and at home when you have pro-Putin propaganda coming out from Tucker Carlson? We got Donald Trump, still the figurehead of the GOP, still praising Putin, when you had the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo saying he's very savvy, and you had senators who went to Putin for God knows what. You have the intel. How compromised is the GOP?
Well, I think the good news is that...
oh, there's good news here, okay.
No, there is some good news here, which is we passed a massive bill to support Ukraine militarily, economically, with humanitarian aid on a very bipartisan basis. Now, you're right. There are certainly still prominent GOP voices, Trump the most prominent, but other senators who are doing their own Kremlin propagandizing, Republican senators. But
Senator Johnson?
Ron Johnson is the first to come to mind. But by and large, there is, I think, bipartisan pushback to this invasion, which is a good thing. But you're right. I mean, at the very top of the GOP, and Trump is still the leader of that party, they are soft on Russia. They are still praising the despotism of Vladimir Putin, still unwilling to stand up to him. And I cannot understand that destructive, unpatriotic affinity for this Kremlin despot.
Maybe we should follow the money, but you're talking about bipartisan invasion, and there's at least support against Russia. We've seen in the past 2 weeks. There isn't bipartisan support for the invasion of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. In fact, the 2 Republicans on the House committee who are saying, you know what, maybe a mob violently overtaking the U.S. Capitol where 5 people died, including 1 cop, that's a step too far. Those 2 Republicans are Representative Cheney and Kinzinger. The RNC, the Republican National Committee, censured them and on their own said, that mob that tried to take over the Capitol and overturn a free and fair election, ordinary citizens participating in legitimate political protest. How do you have a bipartisan support for democracy, for protecting democracy, when the 2 Republicans who decided to join you and the Democrats, who still have a majority as of now, to protect democracy, are censured?
Yeah. Well, it's a very good question, and for a long time in Trump's GOP, there's been this dangerous flirtation, some would say love affair, with autocracy, and they have supported.
I would say a full-throated embrace, but that was sure. Go ahead.
They have embraced efforts to tear down our democracy. They've embraced the big lie. If you persuade people, as Donald Trump and Kevin McCarthy and so many in the Republican Party are trying to do, if you could persuade people that our elections are rigged and fraudulent whenever they lose, then what is left but violence? There's a reason why people attacked the Capitol on January 6th, because they were fed a lie about the election. And rather than repudiating that lie when they saw where it led to a violent attack on the Capitol that put their own lives in danger, so many of these same Republican members are continuing to push the big lie, risking more violence. And it's unconscionable. But that's where Trump's GOP is in terms of our own democracy.
Well, that's one of the 2 major political parties, not just Trump's GOP, it's the GOP and the entire right-wing movement. And what we're dealing with right now is Democrats still have power. You have the presidency, you have a tie in the Senate, but you have the tiebreaker with Kamala Harris, and you have the House. The frustration with many Democratic voters is the following. 81 million people came out during a pandemic. We want accountability, damn it. We want to make sure that these people who are openly participating, right? We even know, we don't have to be on the Senate Intelligence Committee, we know that Mo Brooks was there wearing a Kevlar vest. We know that there was the Willard Hotel and there was a war room. We've seen John Eastman's 6-point memo. We've seen Mark Meadows. We've seen the slideshow, the text. They're openly participating in this, and yet there's no accountability. Democrats, you have the power. How come you aren't flexing it? If it was Republicans, I guarantee you they would be dragging Democrats through the mud. This is an example of Democratic timidity. They bring a butter knife to a knife fight, and then Mitch McConnell brings a bazooka. Adam Schiff, why aren't you flexing? Where's the accountability?
Well, there is accountability in Congress, and I think the January 6th committee, on a very bipartisan basis, is doing everything we should be doing. We have brought in hundreds of people, depose them, interview them, many cooperating, some against their will through the power of subpoena. We are litigating to get the documents we need, and we're going to hold a series of public hearings to show the American people. We'll be doing that within the next couple months. We wanted to get most of our interviews and depositions done first, so that witnesses we need to talk to don't have the benefit of telling us only what they think we already know because they've heard it in the public hearings. So there's a logic to the sequencing of our investigation. Where I am concerned, and this isn't a feature of Democrats in Congress, but I am concerned that the ultimate accountability in the Justice Department is not pursuing with the same vigor what we are pursuing in Congress. And by that I mean there is evidence of potential criminal activity, which the Justice Department does not appear to be investigating, because some of that goes to the former president himself. And if we're truly going to be a nation of laws where everyone is equal before the law, you cannot say that doesn't apply to former presidents.
And that double standard is apparent to people of color, where they're saying there's a war on terror when it comes to the 9/11 attacks. There's a war on crime when it comes to black folks who are using and abusing crack. There's no war here when it comes to those violent insurrectionists and those who helped them. How come the Justice Department, specifically Merrick Garland, how come they haven't followed the facts and done enough yet? Because we're running out of time. You said a couple of months. That gives me pause, I'll be honest. Election's coming up. You don't have that much time.
Well, in terms of Merrick Garland, I think when it comes to people who violently attack the Capitol, the Justice Department is going after them and has brought some very substantial charges, including seditious conspiracy against some of them. My concern, though, is January 6th was only one of multiple lines of effort to overturn the election, others of which may have involved criminal activity as well. And I don't see the Justice Department as active pursuing those lines of investigation as they should be. And to give you, the most flagrant example in my view is the former president was on the phone with the Secretary of State in Georgia demanding that he find 11,780 votes that don't exist.
And we have the recording.
And we have the recording, the precise number that would be needed to overturn the result, which to me is some of the most potent evidence of corrupt intent. It's one thing to say, oh, I think there's fraud, do some investigating, do a recount, which they'd already done, by the way. It's another to say, you need to find me exactly how many votes I need to win. If that were you or me or anyone else watching, they would be under investigation.
Immediately.
Immediately. And the only investigation apparently is the one done by the Fulton County District Attorney. And hats off to the District Attorney's Office for doing their job. But I can tell you, as a former Assistant U.S. Attorney, the Justice Department does not defer to local DA's office in cases of national significance. And this is a case of the greatest national significance. So that I don't understand. It concerns me. I think that there is a reluctance to immerse the department in controversy, which I understand, but that cannot take precedence over enforcing the rule of law when it comes to a corrupt former president.
Well, I hope Merrick Garland is listening. Thank you so much, Congressman Schiff. I could talk to you for another 30 minutes. I appreciate your time, and let's hope that we see those hearings pretty soon. Congressman, thanks for stopping by, and thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget, you can watch all of our studio interviews on the South by Southwest TV app, available on Apple TV, Roku, Android TV, and Amazon Fire. These interviews are also available on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/SXSW, and for a complete list of our interview schedule, check out SXSW.com/studio. I'm Wajat Ali. Thank you for watching.